So our next proposal is, as I said, a goal 3 proposal. And this is, just to remind everybody, this is an efficacy and replication proposal. And I'll just describe what those proposals are. Efficacy and replication goal 3, supports the evaluation of fully developed education interventions to determine whether they produce a beneficial impact relative to a counterfactual when they are implemented under ideal or routine conditions by the end user in authentic education settings. So there's a lot in there. But that's what goal 3 is. And this is a, goal 3, it is a general education, not, oh no, it is special education. I'm sorry, it's still special education.
It's general.
Is it general?
Yes.
Okay, I don't know why I wrote special. Okay, it is general education. It is not a resubmission, and I should have said that for the last one. And so for this one, we have 3 reviewers. So our first reviewer is going to be Kay, and then our second will be Jamelia, and then third will be Jeff. So Kay, can you start us off with your scores?
Yep, for significance, I would give it a 4. For the research plan, I would give it a 4. For personnel, I'd give it a 0.
No, you have to give it a 0.
You have to give it a 1. Good try.
Hey.
I give it a 1.
Sorry.
And resources would be a 5.
What's your overall?
And my overall would be a 3.5.
Okay.
Why are we discussing this?
No, it's a slow application period this time around. Jamelia, could you give us your score? Or give us your score?
So for significance, I would give it a 5.
Okay.
Research plan 5. Personnel 1. Resources 6. And my overall score is a 2.1.
Okay. In this case, 7 is the best for the first 4, and then 1 is the best for the last one.
So it flips.
Yeah, it flips when you get to the end.
Well, I'm going out of range.
Oh, go ahead.
6, 5, 6, 6, 2.
Okay. All right, so it looks like we're going to have a little bit of discussion about this one. Thank you. Kay, can you start us off with a summary and then your strengths and weaknesses for this proposal?
Right. So this proposal is designed to address a national need on reading comprehension, and it's a goal 3. So that's considered what they call an efficacy trial. And the authors have submitted data supporting their application using a previous grant data collected through another grant. And the theoretical and empirical foundations are reasonably strong. I will come back to why I gave the score that I did after I just summarize what the authors have intended. And they also present a brief description about the intervention, and then they go into the actual the research project itself. They did a power analysis using previous research studies, and they present a randomized control trial as the research design. And they are seeking to study populations grade 4, 5, 7, and 8 in rural and suburban schools, which is probably a good thing considering that there might be variation in those areas. And then we get into the projects and the measures and so on that they're using. And the research plan clearly presents some causal research questions that ask whether students who use this software-based intervention perform better than their control counterparts who don't. And then it proceeds into a presentation of a timeline, which is always a good thing to see, when they will be collecting the data and how they'll be collecting the data and so on. Sorry, I'm making you hold this.
Yeah.
And then we have, they've also presented in here the measures that they'll be using, reliabilities and validity for the measures. Actually, validity is not that mentioned, but the reliability is presented, and also the effect sizes from the previous studies, so that they justify the power analysis using these data that are presented here. In the case of the experimental design, like I said, it's a cluster randomized controlled trial that they're proposing, and the research analytic approach is to use hierarchical linear modeling. And the power analyses are presented very clearly, and there's no personnel section or a section on the facilities, and hence I wanted to give the 0 on that one. But I've been forced by my panelists here to give a 1 and assume that because they've gone into this much detail in explaining the research study, they must know what they're talking about. So so overall, I think that these are the scores that I saw based on what I read through. But I do find that there are other different approaches to teaching reading, and there are many other approaches that are not mentioned in here. And so I find that they didn't quite well acknowledge what other competing interventions would look like. So I didn't think they grounded the proposal well enough in why this one was different from other types of interventions out there.
And so can I just want to clarify, your overall score is fairly low, and so is it mostly because of that?
Yes.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. Okay, reviewer 2.
That's a good point. So in my review, I actually thought what was the significance was very strong. The importance to identify reading interventions for students because of the need for literacy, right? And citing national reading rates. I thought that the PIs provided sufficient evidence about their success, because this is the efficacy and replication of implementing the intervention with another population. And the replication and extension is looking at other grade levels and also looking at additional sub-questions in terms of how does student choice in the reading materials impact their reading or the intervention effects, and also expanding the population. So I thought those were all very strong and a compelling reason for this proposal. In terms of the research plan, I had a few concerns and questions. Again, they use the RCT, and the design is strong, but I had some concerns about why they were not testing grade level effects. So what they propose is to look at the effect of the interventions within grade level of this reading intervention, which was a little bit concerning to me because they're actually using a standardized reading measure as an outcome measure, the Gray Silent Reading Test, which would account for grade level differences. So I'm just not clear why they didn't look at it across grade level. I think that would have been a stronger test of the efficacy. Like, did it matter or does it change at certain grade levels? The impact of the intervention. So that's one of my concerns. Another concern is that they just have a single measure for reading. So the Gray Silent Reading Test is an appropriate measure, but there are other reading comprehension measures. And one thing that I was curious about is this is a software-based instruction in reading. Not the Gray Silent Reading Test, but for example, the Gray Oral Reading Test that had a comprehension measure. There have been challenges with assessing reading comprehension because students are basically able to use context clues. Mm-hmm. So it seems, and I'm not sure if that's the case for the Gray Silent Reading Test, but it seems that you would want to have multiple measures of reading comprehension. And that actually wasn't even a research question, which I thought was kind of interesting since they were extending this intervention with a new population. They would want to make sure with these new grade levels that it did in fact, so they needed a main effect question of, does this intervention work with these grade levels for reading? I think one of my biggest concerns is in their extension, they choose rural. So their original study looked at suburban schools, and they choose rural schools, which is important. However, one, it's not really clear that they compare the effects of suburban versus rural. And the other is that suburban versus rural schools will look very different. And I'm curious why they didn't look at like urban versus rural schools, right? Because then you can kind of account for SES and you would kind of be looking at comparable things. So it's just not really clear why they picked rural schools. That's not, it's not explained in the significance section or the research plan. And so, but overall, I still think it's a strong proposal. I don't think that these are confounding variables that can't be accounted for. In terms of personnel, I just gave them a 1 because information wasn't there. But it does seem, since they have secured a goal 2 and they actually reported on their research findings, that they have the potential and the capacity to complete the proposed project. Resources were missing as well, but they did allude to the fact that they're partnering with superintendents to help them. They've partnered with them before to recruit a large number of schools. I didn't, of course, because the resources section was missing, I didn't see letters of support from those school districts, which I think would be really important to kind of verify their statements. But it seems like they have enough contact and commitment from schools, from their past research and the current, to complete the study. And it's a pretty large study, actually. I think there's like 12 schools or school districts.
12 school districts.
Yeah, so that's pretty large. So that's it.
Okay.
So I'm a little bit more enthusiastic about this proposal than the other 2 reviewers. Somehow I was able to find the personnel information uploaded into one of the appendices.
Okay. Good.
So you can find that in there, actually. So you might want to evaluate your score a little differently. If that's the main reason why you scored the proposal very low. But I do find the scientific premise strong. It's a continuation or building on a very successful Goal 2 project. I did share some concerns with reviewer 2 about implementing this study in a rural population. But I also saw that as a strength, a major strength for this work. I'm just a little bit not sure about the feasibility, and having more evidence for implementing that with a rural population would be a little bit more convincing. But I do believe that adds to the significance and the impact of this work. I think the web-based tutoring component is very innovative and could potentially allow this type of work to be scalable at a very large scale nationally if it's effective. So it could be used for suburban or Revere to mention rural schools. Urban schools. We're not quite as sure, but if it could be implemented in rural schools, that could be very powerful. But again, I'm not so convinced that it could be working the same way as it was working in Goal 2. But I do think this work is very promising, has high impact, and that's why I gave it an overall score of 2.
Just to add, I think another one of my concerns is that the rural schools just seem like a convenient sample. And so there's no kind of theoretical, empirical explanation for their inclusion. I think another thing is in terms of their modeling, they talk about HLM, so including covariates at the student level, at the classroom level, but they don't consider the district level, which in addition to rurality, right, it could also look at resources, like how many computers do they have? What's their internet connection? Like things that will have legitimate impact in terms of the intervention.
No, I definitely agree with that. And that's why I have some concerns about successful implementation in the rural schools. Although there's very serious need there, there wasn't enough evidence that component of the proposal can really be carried out successfully.
I agreed with, well, I agree with those who've said that there is a justification for investigating this with rural populations. I don't know that it's really convenient, honestly. If you've worked with rural school districts, you know that you have to you have to recruit almost 4 or 5 times as many schools, reach out to far more administrators just to get a reasonable sample size. It's an understudied population. The current administration might be particularly interested in looking at that population. My only concern related to that was that they mentioned letters of commitment, and I couldn't find it. I tried to look back through, but maybe if someone else sees it. There was something about they had maybe half letters of commitment from maybe a half or a third as many schools as they were going to need. And so given those difficulties with recruiting, I wondered how feasible that would be.
And just to add, it's not that I don't think rural schools are important. I just think that they need to clearly justify that. Like, we're making some assumptions that there's a need for this program in rural settings, but there's no data or research in the proposal that specifically speaks to, in our rural schools, we don't have enough reading teachers, or kids are not reading at a level, or or they're below, et cetera. And I think that needs to be there to justify the inclusion of the sample.
I completely agree with that, and I think that you happen to maybe be familiar with rural student populations, but that's up to them to justify that focus and the need to go in that direction. I want to add kind of generally related to that point that this is a really strong application. I agree with all the strengths that have been described, but it's really disconnected from actual students. And there's no description of who these kids are. They talk about gender, they talk about ethnicity. What about, are there any English language learners? That obviously there would be huge disparities based on ELL status for reading. And so if we try to then connect it again back to like the implications of the study finding and who are the students who are benefiting from this, I think that would have, this is a really missed opportunity on the part of the applicants to help us see how we're going to understand more about, boys being at a disadvantage when it comes to reading, or ELL learners, or kids of color. And so all of those pieces really were just ignored and kind of thrown in there as potential moderators, which I see as a problem.
Fair points. And I should say, Jenny nicely offered to be our synthesizer for today. I forgot to thank her ahead of time for doing that. Any other?
I think the dissemination plan is not particularly clear in kind of the next phase. So how will the PIs share these findings into which stakeholders or which communities, what outlets? The dissemination plan is not articulated, and that is a requirement, I think, this year for Goal 3 grants, is to have a dissemination plan, and possibly also, the word is escaping me. Cost effectiveness. Yeah, a cost effectiveness, cost analysis of the intervention that was missing. But that's new, so perhaps that's why.
I see, okay. But if it's required now, we have to consider that as part of our score, for sure. Let me see if there's anything I wanted to add on my review. One thing was just I found it to be a very strong proposal. One thing I thought was funny was it's 4th, 5th, 7th, and 8th.
Yes.
Yeah.
No 6th graders. What's wrong with the 6th graders? There's no explanation for why there's no 6th graders. They feel left out. But overall, I felt like the design was very strong, the analysis plan was strong, the measures have good reliability. The explanation of past research was quite extensive.
Yes.
Perhaps a little more than I normally expect in a proposal. Yeah. But when you've done a lot of work, I guess you want to talk about it. But what it means is there's less time to explain the planned intervention, the proposed intervention. So I think there have been a little less on that front end of all the things that they've done before, and a little bit more on addressing some of our concerns. I think would have been, they would have had more space to do that. But I think one of the things I always try to be careful with when doing reviews is not revising the proposal for them.
Yes.
You know, we have, the proposal we have is the project they want to do, and we, as much as I might want to add 6th graders, or, you know, you might want to look at grade interactions.
Yes.
That's not what they propose, so we have to evaluate what's here on the paper, not the project we would like to design.
So I think I read somewhere that the reason why they did 4, 5, 7, and 8 is because there was they're doing it in 2 years, 2 waves, and if you take 4th and 5th graders, the next year those students would be in 6th grade.
Yeah, okay.
So that's why that 1 year was left out.
I see. But that would be true for all of the years.
But it's just that 1 year that the data is being collected with the 7th grade or 8th grade.
Right, okay. I was wondering if it had to do something with the middle school transition or something
Yeah.
like that they didn't want to have that transition happen in the middle of
Yes.
testing, because I
Yeah.
would think that could be a valid.
Yeah.
But again, I'm not writing the proposal for them.
Exactly. It's really hard to not revise the
It really
proposal.
is. It really is. Reviewers are very tempted to do that. Okay, so I think if we're done with our discussion, let's revisit our score. Or Jeff, did you have any more things to raise? No? Okay. Okay, thank you, Sue. So reviewer 1K, do you want to revise your scores at all?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, you're still doing your synthesis? Okay, oh yeah, sorry. We have to, before we redo the scores, we have the synthesis. So each proposal gets synthesized by someone else on the panel who's not a main reviewer. So Jenny, can you give us the synthesis that you have so far?
Yes, and I typed as fast as I can, but I'm sure I missed things, so please, if I missed something or wrote something incorrectly, please let me know. Most panel members were enthusiastic about this proposal.
That's fair.
Okay. There was some disagreement on the panel regarding the justification of including rural schools. There is no theoretical or research-based justification in the proposal. It's unclear why 6th graders are excluded from this group of 4th to 8th grade participants. This was explained at some point, but remained unclear to several panelists. Past research was very thoroughly explained. If streamlined, they could have had more room for details that are suggested. The research plan, they should consider comparing the contexts between, or it suggested that they consider comparing the contexts between rural and suburban schools. They have very different resources, et cetera. Some panelists suggested that the sample might be difficult to recruit. They would benefit from a robust recruitment plan. More connection needs to be made to real schools. This maybe should go with significance, particularly consider gender and diversity-based differences. The dissemination plan is underdeveloped. Details are needed for outlets by which the info will be distributed, and no cost analysis is included. That's about it.
And some panelists couldn't find the personnel section.
I won't.
Julie, I don't know if all of your concerns about grade level were captured in the synthesis. Is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, so I have a concern that their analyses are within grade as opposed to looking at grade level differences. And also the fact that they're only relying on a single reading comprehension measure that might mask or not adequately assess reading. Actually, as I say that, I'm like, but it's pretty reliable. But I just want, I just want another reading measure.
That's
You wouldn't happen to study reading, would you?
No, I actually don't. But I did in my doctoral training.
I didn't include that the first time because they have been telling us lately to only include, what's not already written in people's reviews. But since you just emphasized it here, I added that. I wrote grade level differences should be evaluated and an additional reading measure should be added.
Thank you. That's right. Yeah, we want to not repeat what we already have in our reviews.
Unless it's emphasized again.
You can say other panelists agreed with that
Yes.
point to make it more. Okay, any other additions or changes to the synthesis? No, thank you very much for doing that. So that's the synthesis that goes to the proposal investigators. Okay, so now let's revisit our scores. Okay. Kay, do you want to change your scores at all?
Yeah, I would change the significance to a 6, the research plan to a 6.
Okay.
Personnel to a 6.
You found it.
Let's give it a 7.
That would not happen.
And the overall to a 2.1.
Okay, that's a big jump. Okay. It is a big jump. Reviewer 2.
You all convinced me.
I convinced you.
I think I'm going to stay where I'm at.
So there we are. Okay, great. Reviewer 3.
In light of the discussion with the panelists, I'm moving significance to 5.
Okay.
Personnel, I saw it, so I'm going to put 7 actually. And overall score, I'm moving to 3.
To 3. So worse.
Based on,
Okay.
No, it does.
I mean, some of the concerns were pretty significant.
Wow. So okay. So Julia convinced you.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. That can happen. That can happen. Yeah, but you guys canceled each other out, so that's okay. All right, so now we can do our little scores.
So before I score,
yes,
there's
yes.
a little bit of a disconnect for me in your scores between a significance of a 5 and such a strong overall score. So I'm having a hard time kind of thinking about how to use that to inform my own scores. That's a pretty modest significance score, a 5.
I think that it's important.
Can you speak into the microphone?
I'm sorry. I have to look at my scores
Yeah, it's fine.
and do a deep reflection. I think that the proposal is important, right? I think that the issues that I'm raising are not confounding variables in the sense that it's not going to result in the findings being compromised. If they do, like, I think they can still do the study. I just think it would be stronger if they address those things. So I just feel like that's my calibration. I don't have a good response for you, Esther.
That was reasonable.
Yeah, but again, I want to make sure we're not holding it. We're not wishing it was a different study. That we want to
Right.
just.
Well,
just
then in
rate the
that
study that we
case,
have in
then
front of
I'm
us.
going to. Oh,
Oh,
We don't want to peer
I
pressure
don't mean
you.
to push you to change your score. I just
I don't think you could change it now.
I know. Technically, I can't change it. It's too late. But it's. I don't. I
No,
just.
you could.
Could I
Yeah,
change
you could
it?
still
can
change.
ask permission.
Yeah, if we.
I don't know. Did people already submit their scores?
We'll just say no. We didn't open it up. We didn't open it up, so nobody was able to do it yet.
Okay.
You can leave it there.
You don't have to
your
change it. It
concern,
just-
Esther, is that.
Well, I'm trying to, in coming up with my own scores and really honoring that you, the three of you, read it deeply, more deeply than I did. I read it during the bathroom break. There is, I mean, a 5 to me is not a fundable. I don't want to fund a 5, and I know we're not supposed to talk funding line, but
Yeah,
you know. So, and a 5 is good, but that's not selling me on. And so I'm trying to kind of. There are 2 5s up there now for significance, and that's not compelling to me.
So my understanding is that the individual, like, it doesn't always have to necessarily directly align with the
No, they
overall
don't.
score.
Yeah.
And so I can see that. So when I look at a 5, with 7 being excellent, a 5 seems average to me. I'm gonna just stay where I am.
Okay, that's
I'm gonna
fine.
stay where I am.
Okay.
You're average. Then.
I I'm not gonna fall to peer pressure.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Okay, but everyone can score on their own however they like. And it's anonymous. We don't know what each other is doing, so we'll just have to see who gets funded in the end. All right. Well, thank you all for participating in the review process. I hope it was interesting for you. And I think that concludes our review.
All right.
Nice job.
All right, so let's give a round of applause to our
Hard questions, Esther.